Roosevelt has finally decided to send in troops under the request of President Palma. This revolution, led by Jose Miguel Gomez, was inspired by Palma's methods of campaigning for election. He fired his previous cabinet and hired a new fighting cabinet that would take whatever measures necessary to assure Palma won the election. This feared Cubans on the liberal side, including Gomez, who was their candidate. President Palma won the election due to his intense campaign methods, and Gomez and his followers rebelled. When the revolution began, Palma asked Roosevelt to send in troops to Cuba to help end the fight and get power restored. However, Roosevelt was hesitant to do so and instead sent William Howard Taft and Robert Bacon to peacefully negotiate an end to the war. However, conditions worsened and the attempts at a peaceful end to the revolution were failing. Palma persisted in Roosevelt to send troops, but Roosevelt still hesitated. So, Palma had to turn to more drastic measures to make sure this intervention was happening. And he and his cabinet resigned in late September, leaving Cuba without a government. Thus, Roosevelt was forced to send in troops and intervene. Along with this, he also set up a provisional government under Taft that will stay in place until the war ends and power is restored to a unified Cuban government. Roosevelt has made it clear that the intention of the United States is not to take over Cuba, but to end the revolution and assure proper government is put into place.
On September 22nd, there was a race riot in Atlanta, Georgia. Here, white mobs injured and killed dozens of blacks. They also caused an immense amount of property damage to this town. Sources say that the riot was a result of black men assaulting white females. However, there were numerous other underlying causes. For instance, there were hostilities in the workforce due to black and white workers competing for the same jobs. Leadership roles were given to white males, and these leaders implemented Jim Crow segregation laws. Many whites feared black upper class and supported disenfranchisement to keep blacks inferior to them. White men also wrote stories and cartoons depicting black men as criminals and rapists, which heightened tension. On September 22nd, alleged stories of assaults on white women came out in the paper, and a few hours later, thousands of white men were gathered in Atlanta. The crowds could not be calmed and soon became a mob. The mob attacked blacks as well as black-owned businesses. Windows were smashed and owners were violently killed. Public places such as streetcars were also attacked, killing black women and children. Later in the night, the state militia was called upon, but the mob was not broken up until the heavy downpour of rain. Black fear ran strong throughout Atlanta, and black men began to arm themselves in case of another attack. However, another mob did not break out, and there was a call to end violence a few days after the incident.
After colored people were denied the right to stay in a New York hotel, a civil rights group of 29, including W.E. Du Bois, gathered in Niagara Falls. The Niagara movement drafted the Declaration of Principles, where they stated they would no longer be oppressed. This movement attempted a change in legality, specifically economics, education, and issues of crime. They asked for total equal rights and voting rights. The whole country has heard of their cry for the end of segregation. It is pointless for Americans to worry about this, as no legislative action will take place. Popular opinion will suffice to keep colored people inferior to whites. Lack of organization and leadership will keep people away from joining. Furthermore, they lack the necessary funds to get anywhere, and also the proper staff. The Niagara movement will also not be able to merge with other groups because their ideals are so different, so they will never succeed in gaining legislation. Many of us believe that colored people should end these types of movements and simply integrate into society. This would end all hostilities in government, the workforce, and many other areas of society.
Great American Bear because he's the teddy bear. He's soft and plush and comes in all colors and sizes. He's harmless and gentle and sure to be your child's favorite toy. Order yours now before they sell out.
I'm Lauren Hamilton, and I'm here at the Little Falls train station in regards to the Hepburn Act. On June 29th, this act was passed under the approval of President Roosevelt. This act would give the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC, increased power as well as the federal government in the regulation of railroads. Of the passage of this act was the effects of inflation on railroad companies and their need to increase rates in order to pay for these costs. The Hepburn Act would allow the ICC to set maximum rates for passengers and shipping companies to pay. It also gave the Commission power to enforce regulations, a power previously held by federal courts. The factors of this act have been met with much controversy, for passengers and shippers have been greatly angered by the increased rates, and many fear the strength of power given to the ICC. Another factor of the Hepburn Act that both scares and angers many Americans was that it provided the federal government greater power in the regulation of railroads. Since the beginning of Roosevelt's presidency, this has been a major and growing controversy for the nation. It brings the question, what role belongs to the federal
supporters have argued that increased federal power is beneficial to Americans and would protect rather than harm the nation. On the other hand, supporters of laissez-faire capitalism fear that this power would turn our country's democracy into a tyranny.
On June 30th, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Meat Inspection Act, which prohibited the sale of misbranded farm animals and made sure that any livestock was processed under sanitary conditions before being put up for sale. I'm here now in the factory to observe this work. It made a law that all animals such as cows, sheep, goat, and horses were thoroughly inspected both before and after being slaughtered and put out for people to buy and consume. The law which Roosevelt signed also retained to shipments from foreign areas, meaning that any livestock were to undergo the same inspection. The want for a more secure packaging and overview of food came about in 1898 when company Armour & Co. had supplied the U.S. Army with cans upon cans of rotten beef during the Spanish-American War. Due to this rotten meat, many of those who were prepared for war became extremely ill and were unable to fight, and some even died. The company thought their packaging was secure in a tin container lined with a layer of boric acid, but a demand for more secure and better inspection became huge. The Pure Food Investigating Committee made it known to the public that borax, acid, and formaldehyde were unsafe to use for packaging, making many of the nation's foods unhealthy to consume. The public being completely outraged had been mainly focused on the Beef Trust, which was a group made up of 5 largest meatpacking companies, its basis for packing houses being in Chicago. Upton Sinclair brought the most attention to the Chicago packing houses, where he made a promise to spend a year in Chicago to observe and write about the Beef Trust exploitation of workers. This exploit is known as The Jungle, which is one of his most popular works, where he talked about the working conditions as well as the horrible meatpacking practices. After this went viral, the people were even more outraged than before and created even greater sanitation issues. Though Sinclair's prime focus when writing The Jungle was to promote socialism. By the beginning of 1906, the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act had been long stalled by Congress, and the passage of both these acts were done quickly after Neil Reynolds created charges against Sinclair, which Roosevelt soon used as a way to speed the process up.
Hi, today we're joined with the author of The Jungle, Mr. Upton Sinclair. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to do a quick interview, is that fine?
Yes.
Okay. First question. What was the purpose of writing The Jungle?
My main focus in writing The Jungle was to expose the conditions the immigrants had to go through as they tried to survive Chicago's meatpacking district. I want to show the unfair labor, housing, and economic conditions these immigrants were living through. My goal was to create a peace politicians could no longer avoid.
Okay. How do you feel about the responses you received from the novel?
My main objective was to exploit the harsh conditions immigrants were living through. Instead, the public more often focused on food safety, which I do agree is important, but it wasn't the main point I intended to get across. I aimed at the public's heart and accidentally hit them in the stomach.
What made the meatpacking industry so corrupt?
The people who worked for the meatpacking industry only really care about the money and were willing to do whatever it is they had to do to continue having money in their pockets. They hired immigrants, paying them below minimum wage, knowing they will take whatever money they can get. Manipulating immigrants was horrible, but they did the same to children and women as well, because they were so helpless. This is what I wanted those who read my novel to see. By buying these industries' products, they are contributing to mistreatment of the immigrants.
What kind of information did the workers tell you while you were there with them?
They told me that as they were tampering with the meat, any poison that was attached to the animal was packaged up with it. The guts of the animal that were thrown onto the ground were swept up and also packaged. Rotten meat was constantly being sold to the public without their knowledge.
Why did you reject the legislation that led to the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act?
The legislation would cost the United States a great deal of money that they didn't have and definitely didn't have to spend on such a topic like this. The legislation would start a nation debt while costing the meatpacking industry not a single cent.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Sinclair. We enjoyed having you.
Thank you.
3 years after sending U.S. military to support the Panamanian revolt, President Teddy Roosevelt finally visited Panama. Panamanian independence allowed for the start of the Panama Canal Project, and during his 4 days in Panama, Roosevelt visited the project site where construction preparations were underway, the construction of which had suffered many setbacks, including worker accidents and disease outbreaks. During July of last year, railroad specialist by the name of John Stevens took over as chief engineer. Since then, he immediately addressed workforce issues by recruiting West Indian laborers. He also contributed to the effort by ordering new equipment and devising efficient methods to speed up work, such as the use of swinging boom to lift chunks of railroad track and adjust the train routine for carting away material. He also quickly recognized the difficulties posed by landslides and convinced Roosevelt that a lock canal was best for the trade.